Hey crew, it's Pitt, and I'm back with some more Socrates. Today we are diving back into Plato's Republic. We are beginning Book 8 because we finished Book 7. Let's dig in and see where it leads. So there is this. This has now been agreed, Lockhon, for a city to be governed at its best. Women are to be shared. Children are to be shared, and all education too. And, in like manner, all activities are to be shared, both in war and in peace, and those among them who turn out best in philosophy, and in warfare too, are to be their kings. This was agreed, said he. And indeed, we also accepted that once the rulers are in place, they will take the soldiers in hand and settle them into living arrangements of the sort we have already described, which are common to all, with nothing private to anyone. And as well as such living arrangements, we also agreed upon the sort of possessions they will have, as you may recall. Yes, said he, I recall. We thought that none of them should acquire any of the possessions that everyone else has nowadays. Rather, like warrior athletes and guardians, they must care for themselves and for the rest of the city, accepting their guardians' pay for the year from the others to sustain them in their work. You are right, said I, but come on. Now that we have concluded this, let us remember where we digressed from, so that we may proceed along the same course once more. That is not difficult, said he. You presented your arguments about the city then, much as you are doing now, as though the exposition was complete. You proposed a city, saying that a city like the one you had described was good, and so was the man who resembled it, even though it seems you are able to speak of a still more beautiful city and a more beautiful man too. But, in any case, you were saying that if this city is right and others are in error, as you maintained, as I recall, that there are 4 other forms of government besides this one. You said these would be worth describing, to see their particular errors, and the kind of people who resemble these forms, and having agreed upon who is the most excellent and who is the worst man, we might then investigate whether the most excellent person is happiest, and the worst is most wretched, or whether the situation is otherwise. And when I was asking you for which 4 forms of government you meant, Polymarchus and Adeimantus interrupted at that stage. And so it was that you took up the argument again and arrived here. That is right, said I. You have remembered this very well. So then, like a wrestler, offer me the same hold once more, and in response to my same question, try to say what you were about to say at the time. I shall, if I am able to, said I. And indeed, said he, I am anxious to learn for myself what 4 forms of government you were referring to then. That is not difficult, so listen. The forms I am referring to are those that have names. First is the one that most people praise, your Cretan or Spartan form. Second to arise, and second too, in terms of praise, is the one called oligarchy, the form of government full of evils of plenty. Next comes the adversary of this form, democracy. And then there is a noble tyranny, set apart from all the others, the 4th and last disease of the city. Or can you think of some other form of government of any type that constitutes another form? Indeed, dynasties, purchased kingships, and other forms of government of this sort are presumably something intermediate between these 4, and they are to be found no less among the barbarians than among the Greeks. Yes, said he, many unusual forms are spoken of. Now, said I, do you know that must be as many types of human character as there are forms of government? Or do you think that forms of government come into existence from oak or from rock, and not from the characters of the people in the cities, which, in a sense, exert their influence and pull everything else in their direction? Yes, said he, that is where they come from, and not from anywhere else at all. In that case, if there are 5 types of cities, there would also be 5 conditions of individual souls. Indeed. Well, now, we have already described the person who resembles the aristocracy, whom we rightly declare to be good and just. We have. Now, after this, we do not describe the lesser men. First, the ambitious fellow who loves honor and corresponds to the Spartan form of government. Then the oligarchic man, the democratic, and finally the tyrannical. Would this not enable us to look at the most unjust man alongside the most just man and complete our inquiry as to where exactly pure justice stands relative to pure injustice in relation to the happiness or wretchedness of their possessor? So that we could either be persuaded by Thrasymachus and pursue injustice, or accept the argument that is now emerging and pursue justice. Yes, said he, that is exactly what we should do. Entirely so. Well, now, we began this process by considering the characters of the various forms of government, where they are more obvious, prior to considering those of the individuals. So, should we proceed in a similar way now, and consider first the form of government that loves honor? In our language, I have no other name to call it except timocracy or timarchy. And in relation to this, we shall consider the man who resembles it. Then, after that, we shall consider the oligarchy and the oligarchic man. And after looking at the democracy, we will hold the democratic man. And arriving at the fourth city, the tyrannical one, and looking at that, and at the tyrannical soul too, we shall try to become competent judges of the issues we have put forward. Well, said he, if we proceed in this way, our perspective and judgment would surely be reasonable. Come on then, let us try to describe the way in which democracy would arise from aristocracy. Or is it simply that change in any form of government comes from the part of it that it exercises authority? Whatever faction arises in that particular part, whereas if of one mind, even if it is very small, no disturbance is possible. Yes, indeed so. So, Glaucon, how shall this city of ours be disturbed? And in what way shall our auxiliaries be, and our rulers develop factions against one another and against themselves? Or would you prefer that we copy Homer and pray to the Muses to tell us how faction first came about, and we would declare that they are playing with us like children, speaking lightly but in tragic style, pretending to be serious by speaking in a lofty manner? How? As follows. Although it is difficult to disturb a city that has been constituted in this way, nevertheless, since the destruction is the lot of anything that has come into being, even something constituted like this will not endure for all time. It too will be dissolved, and its dissolution will be as follows. Not alone for the plants of the earth, but also among the animals on the earth, there is productiveness and sterility of their souls and bodies as they run their circular course and complete their cycles, which are short for those who are short-lived and longer for the long-lived. But for your race, although the people whom you educated as leaders of the city are wise, they will be unable, by calculation combined with sense experience, to hit upon the best time for bringing children to birth, and for not bearing children. This will evade them, and they will on occasion bring forth children when they should not. Now, divine birth has a cycle that the perfect number encompasses. For a human being, the number is the first in which the root and square increases. Having comprehended 3 distances and 4 limits of whatever brings about likeness and unlikeness, waxings and wanings, renders all things mutually agreeable and expressible towards one another. Of these 4, 3 yoked together with 5 yield 2 harmonies when increased threefold. The first is equal, an equal number of times, 100 times this amount. The other is equal in length on one side, but is oblong on the other side, of 100 squares of rational diameters of 5 diminished by 1 each, or, if of irrational diameters, by 2, on the one, or on the other of 100 cubes of 3. This entire geometrical number is lord of anything like this, of better and worse births. And whenever our guardians, in ignorance of this, makes brides cohabit with grooms inappropriately, their children will be neither well developed nor fortunate. And although their predecessors will install the best of them in power, nevertheless, being unworthy, when their turn comes to rule and exercise the powers of their fathers, they will begin as guardians, firstly, to pay little heed to us muses by regarding our realm of music as less important. And secondly, they will neglect the realm of gymnastics too. And so your own young people will become less musical. From these, rulers would be installed who cannot exercise much guardianship when it comes to testing, for the races of Hesiod and of your people too, the gold, the silver, bronze, and iron. And the indiscriminate mixing of iron with silver and bronze with gold will produce dissimilarity and inappropriate inconsistency, which always begets war and enmity wherever they arise. So we should declare that such is the lineage of faction whenever and wherever it occurs. And we shall declare, said he, that they have answered correctly. And they must, said I, since they are muses. Well then, said he, what shall the muses say next? One faction has arisen, said I. Both races began to exert their influence, the iron and brass kinds drawing the city towards the acquisition of money, land and property, gold and silver, while the gold and silver kinds, for their part, since these are not in poverty but are naturally wealthy of the soul, led in the direction of excellence and ancient order. As they struggled violently in opposite directions, they eventually agreed to compromise, distribute land and property for themselves, and make these private. With these, they enslaved those they had previously guarded as free men, friends, and supporters by treating them as serfs and underlings, while they themselves attended to warfare and guarding themselves against their former friends. I think, said he, that this is how the change comes about. Would not this form of government, said I, be something in between aristocracy and oligarchy? Very much so. Well then, that is how it will change. But once it has changed, how will it be administered? Or is it obvious that in some respects it will imitate the previous form of government, and in other respects the oligarchy, since it is between them, and that will also have something that is particular to itself? Quite so, said he. And in the respect to its rulers, the fact that its military class refrains from work in the lands, and from skilled labor, and from other sorts of money-making, in its provision of common meals, and the attention it pays to physical exercise and military competition, in everything of this sort, will it not imitate the previous form? Yes. Will not the features, that for the most part are particular of it to itself, be its fear of admitting the wise to positions of authority, since it no longer has people of this sort who are straightforward and sincere, rather than complicated? Will it not also prefer spirited types who are simpler, more fitted by nature for war than peace, who attach value to its tactics and its strategies? And will it not spend all its time waging war? Yes. And yet, people like this will have a longing for money, just like those in the oligarchies, harboring a concealed but fierce reverence for gold and silver, because they have storehouses and private treasuries in which to keep it all hidden, and enclosures too. Houses which are really private nests in which they spend their money, lavishing it extravagantly on women and on many others, whomever they please. Very true, said he. And they will also be miserly with money, since they revere it and may not acquire it openly. Yet, because of desire, they love spending other people's money and enjoying their pleasures in secret, running away from the law like boys from their father, having been educated by force rather than persuasion, because they paid no heed to the true muse who accompanies argument in philosophy, and had more respect for gymnastics than for music. You are, said he, most certainly describing a form of government that is a mixture of good and bad. Yes, it is mixed, said I. But what is most distinctive about it is its one particular feature. Due to the dominance of spiritedness in it, it is ambitious and loves honor. Most certainly, said he. Well, this form of government would arise in this way. And this is what it would look like. This is just a verbal sketch providing an outline without the detail, because a sketch will indeed be enough to reveal the most just person and the most unjust. But to describe all forms of government and all their characters, omitting nothing, would be a lengthy undertaking. That is right, said he. Now, what about the man who corresponds to this form of government? How did he arise? And what sort of person is he? I think, said Adiamantus, that when it comes to ambition, at any rate, he is quite like Glaucon here. Well, in that respect, said I, perhaps you are right. But in other respects, his nature is different. In what respects? He must be more stubborn, said I, and less musical, even though he loves music, and despite being a good listener, he is not at all eloquent. And he would be aggressive towards slaves rather than merely looking down upon them, as an adequately educated person would do. Yet he would be gentle towards freemen and highly respectful towards those in authority. He himself loves authority, and he loves honor, and he is worthy of authority, not because of what he says or anything of that sort, but because of his achievements on the battlefield and in military affairs generally, being fond of physical exercise and hunting. Yes, said he, this is the character of that form of government. Would not a person like this despise money when young, but grow more and more fond of it as the older he gets, because he has a share of this money-loving nature and is no longer directed towards excellence purely and simply, because he has been deprived of its very best guardian. What is that? Asked Adiamantus. Reason, said I, combined with music, which alone, once engendered, dwells as the lifelong preserver of excellence for whoever possesses it. Very good, said he. So, that is what the young Timocrat is like, he said. He is just like this sort of city. Yes, indeed. Now, this person arises somewhat as follows. Sometimes he is the young son of a good father who is living in a city that is not well run. His father shuns the honors, possessions of authority, legal disputes, and businesses of that sort. And he is willing to accept loss of stature to avoid trouble. And how, he asked, does he become timocratic? Whenever, in the first place, he hears his mother being annoyed at the fact that her husband is not one of the rulers, and that she is losing status among the other women as a result. She sees that he is not particularly serious about money, and does not fight or engage in slander, either in private or in the law courts or public gatherings, but is indifferent to everything like this. She notices that he is constantly turned in on himself, does not show her much respect, and does not disrespect her either. And she gets annoyed at all this and tells her son that his father is unmanly and extremely neglectful. And she repeats all the other expressions of this sort that women like to use when speaking of such men. Yes, yes, said Adiamantus, there are lots of them, and that is what they are like. And you know, said I, that the servants of such men, the ones that seem well intentioned, sometimes say this sort of thing secretly to the sons. And if they see someone owing money to his father, or doing him some other injustice, someone whom the father will not pursue, they exhort him to take revenge on all such people. And when he becomes a man, and be more of a man than his father, and when he goes out, he hears and sees other things of this sort. Those who do what belongs to themselves in the city are called simple-minded and are held in little regard, while those who do not are honored and praised. When the young man, seeing and hearing all this, and also hearing the words of his father and seeing his father's actions from close up, alongside those of everyone else, is dragged in both directions, his father encouraging and fostering the rational element in his soul, while the others foster the appetitive and spirited elements, because he is not by nature a bad man, but has fallen into a bad company of others. He is pulled by both of these, ends up in the middle, and hands over authority within himself to the middle element of ambition and spiritedness, and becomes a high-spirited man who loves honor. I think that you have described the origin of this fellow quite accurately. In that case, we have our second form of government, and the corresponding man, too. We have indeed. After this, should we, as Asialicus says, speak of another man said before another city, or, according to our procedure, speak of the city first? Yes, certainly. And the form of government that comes from this one, I think, would be oligarchy. Well, what kind of constitution do you call oligarchy? The one that is based on property qualification, in which the rich rule and the poor man has no share of authority. I understand, said he. Should we not say how the change from democracy to oligarchy first begins? And indeed, even to the blind, it is obvious how this changes. How? That treasury, said I, private to each, filled with gold, is what destroys a form of government of this sort. For, in the first place, they invent various extravagances for themselves, and divert the laws to this end by disobeying them themselves. And their wives do likewise, quite likely. Next, I imagine, they start watching each other. By entering into rivalry, they eventually make almost everyone else behave just like themselves. That is likely. And thereafter, as they proceed further with their money-making, the more honor they assign to wealth, the less honor they assign to excellence. Or is this not how excellence contrasts with wealth, as if they were each being weighed on a balance that is constantly inclining in the opposite directions? Very much so, said he. So when wealth and wealthy people are honored in a city, excellence and the good people are shown less honor. Evidently. But whatever is honored is constantly practiced, and whatever is dishonored is neglected. Just so. Then, instead of being ambitious men who love honor, they finally become men who love money and money making. They praise the wealthy man. They are in awe of him and put him in positions of authority, while they dishonor the poor man. Absolutely. And at that stage, they pass a law that defines the oligarchical form of government. They prescribe a particular sum of money, which is more when it is more of an oligarchy, and less when less so. And they decree that anyone whose property falls short of the prescribed valuation may have no involvement in the ruling of a city. They bring about either through force of arms, or else they will establish a form of government like this through fear. Is this not so? Yes, it is. Well, then, this is what we might call its establishment. Yes, but, well, then, this is what we might call its establishment. Yes, said he, but what is the manner of this form of government, and what defects do we say it possesses? Well, firstly, consider its own defining characteristic and what it is like. What if helmsmen for ships were to be appointed based upon a property qualification, and the poor man was never given the role, even if he was a better helmsman? Their sea voyage would be terrible. Does not the same apply to the control of anything else at all? Yes, I think so. Except a city? Or does this apply to a city? Very much so, said he, to a city most of all, since the role of a city is so difficult and important. Then oligarchy would possess this one significant defect. Apparently. What about this? Is the following defect any less significant? Which one? The fact that such a city is not one, but necessarily two. A city of poor folk and a city of wealthy people, living in the same place but always scheming against one another. By Zeus, that is not a less significant defect. And indeed, is it not good? It is not good that they are unlikely to be able to wage a war, because that compels them either to arm the general population and then be more afraid of them than the enemy, or not to arm them and thus be true oligarchs. A few rulers alone on the battlefield, and at the same time, they are unwilling to contribute to military expenditure because they love money so much. Not good indeed. And what about the aspect we criticized a while ago? What about the fact that people have lots of different roles? Under such a form of government, the same people simultaneously engage in agriculture, make money, and fight wars. Do you think this is all right? No, not at all. Then let us see if such a form of government is the first to tolerate the greatest of all the evils, which is allowing someone to sell everything he has, and allowing someone else to take possession of this. Having sold everything, the man may live on in the city without any role as a businessman, a craftsman, a cavalryman, or an infantryman. They call him poor, a man without means. It is the first to tolerate this, said he. That sort of thing certainly will not be prohibited in oligarchies, or else some people would not be excessively wealthy while others are in total poverty. That is right. Think about this too. When he was still wealthy, was this fellow of any more benefit to the city in the various roles we have described? Or did he seem to be one of the rulers of the city, when in truth he was neither a ruler nor an underling, but a mere spender of anything that was available? That is it, said he. He seemed to be something else, but he was nothing more than a spendthrift. Would you like us to declare that just as a drone is born in a cell of a honeycomb, a pestilence to the hive, so too is a man like this, born in a private dwelling house, a drone and a pestilence to the city? Yes, certainly, Socrates. Now, Adeimantus, although the god made all the winged drones without any stings, did he not make some of the drones that go by foot stingless, and others with terrible stings? Is it not the case that those who remain beggars to the very end belong to the stinkless sort, while all the so-called evildoers are from the drones which have stings? Very true, said he. So it is evident, said I, that in any city where you see beggars, there are thieves and cut purses somewhere in the vicinity, hidden away, temple robbers too, and artificers of all sorts of evil deeds. That is evident. What about this? Do you not see beggars in the oligarchical cities? Yes. Almost everyone apart from those in authority are beggars. Should we not presume, then, that there are also lots of evildoers in these cities, complete with stings whom the rulers deliberately restrain by force? We should presume so. Well then, shall we declare that people like this arise because of ill education, bad upbringing, and the evil foundations of this form of government? We shall. In that case, then, the oligarchical city should be something of this sort, and would have as many evils as this, and perhaps even more. That about sums it up. Then, said I, we have dealt with this form of government too, the one they call oligarchy, the one having rulers appointed on the basis of a property qualification. Next, we should consider the person who resembles this, how he arises, and what he is like once he has arisen. Yes, certainly. Does not the change from that democratic type to the oligarchic type take place, for the most part, as follows? How? It happens when a son, born to a democratic man, emulates his father at first and follows in that man's footsteps. Then he sees him suddenly dashed against the city like a ship against a reef, his property and the man himself being lost overboard. Perhaps he was serving as a general or exercising some other important position of authority, and then ended up in court because of damaging allegations by false informers, and was put to death or exiled, or lost his civil rights and had all his property confiscated. Quite likely, said he. And the son, my friend, seeing all of this, suffering its consequences and losing all his property, is presumably afraid, and immediately thrusts any love of honor and that spiritedness too from the throne in his own soul. Humbled by poverty, he turns to money making, and gradually, by being thrifty and working hard, he gets some money together. Now, do you not think someone like this at that stage would install the appetitive element with its love of money on that throne, turn this into the great king within himself, and deck it out with tiaras and necklets and ceremonial swords? I do, said he. And I presume that he sees the rational and the spirited elements on the ground on either side, beneath that king as his slaves. He would not allow the rational element to work out or to consider anything except how to turn smaller sums of money into larger ones. And he would not allow the spirited element to hold anything at all, or to have any respect for anything apart from wealth and wealthy people, or to take pride in anything at all except the acquisition of wealth, anything that brings this about. There is, said he, no other transformation of a young man who loves honor into one who loves money that is as swift and as sure as this. So, is this fellow our oligarchical man? Well, at any rate, the transformation of this fellow starts with a man who resembles the democracy, the form that turns into oligarchy. Let us investigate whether he himself resembles the oligarchy. Let us investigate it. Would he not resemble it firstly by assigning the utmost importance to money? Of course. And indeed, by being miserly and diligent, satisfying only the most necessary of his desires without making provision for any other expenditure, and enslaving the other desires because they are unprofitable. Yes, certainly. He is a squalid fellow, a man who builds up his fortune by making a profit out of everything, the sort of man that most people praise. Would not this fellow be the one who resembles a form of government like oligarchy? Well, I think so, said he. At any rate, money is what this city honors most, and so does a man like this. Yes, presumably because a man like this has not paid attention to education. It seems not, or else he would not have installed blind wealth as the leader of his chorus, and honored the most. Nicely explained, but consider this. Should we not state that because of his lack of education, drone-like desires arise in him, the desires of the beggar. In some cases, those of the evildoer in others, but these are restrained by his other concern. Indeed, very much so. Now, do you know where you will see the evil deeds of these people if you look? Where? In their guardianship of orphans, and any other opportunity like this that arises, where they get unrestricted license to act unjustly. True. So, is it not obvious from this that in the other business dealings, those in which a man like this is well regarded and seems to be acting justly, he is forcibly restraining other bad, innate desires by some moderation of his own devising. He does not persuade them that it is better not to do this, nor does he tame them by reason, but by compulsion and fear, because he is afraid of losing the rest of his property. Yes, entirely so. And by Zeus, my friend, once they have had the opportunity to spend other people's money, you will find that the drone-like desires are present in most of them. Yes, with great intensity. So a man like this would not be free of internal factions, nor would he be one person, but somehow double. Although his better desires would, for the most part, prevail over his worse desires, quite so. Because of this, I believe, such a person would be more respectable than many others, but the true excellence of the even-minded and harmonious soul would escape him by some distance. I think so. And indeed, this miserly fellow, as a private citizen, is a poor competitor when it comes to any civic ambition or love of noble achievements. And he is not prepared to spend money for the sake of good reputation or on any rivalries of this sort. He is afraid to waken the desires that make him spend money and summon them to join the battle and fulfill his ambition. So he fights like a true oligarch, with only a few of his own resources, loses most of the time, but remains wealthy. Very much so, said he. Now, are we still in any doubt that the miserly moneymaker corresponds to the oligarchical city and resembles it? Not at all, said he. Then we should, it seems, consider the democracy next, the manner in which it arises and what it is like once it has arisen. This will allow us to recognize the character of the man who is like this and judge him alongside the others. Well, we would at least be proceeding much as we did earlier. Does the change from oligarchy to democracy come about somehow because of this insatiable desire for what is presented as good, the need to become as wealthy as possible? I asked. How so? Since the rulers hold office in that city because they have acquired so much wealth, they are, I think, unwilling to restrict by law any young people who are becoming unrestrained, and prevent them from spending and wasting all they possess. This enables them to buy up the property of such young folk, and also to lend money on security of the property, thus becoming even wealthier and more privileged than before. More than anything. Now, is it not obvious already that in a city it is impossible to have a reverence for wealth and sufficient sound-mindedness among the citizens at the same time? Is it not necessary rather to neglect one or the other? Yes, said he, that is fairly obvious. In fact, when they neglect this in the oligarchies and encourage unrestrained behaviors, good people are sometimes forced into poverty. Very much so. So these people, I imagine, sit there in the city, complete with stings, in armed array, some of them in debt, some of them deprived of their rights, and some in both predicaments. They hate and conspire against those who took their possessions, and against everyone else too, and they are passionate for revolution. That is right. And yet the money makers, keeping their heads down and without even seeming to notice these people, insert their silver, injuring anyone else who does not consistently resist them. And they recover their original sum many times over in interest, and cause the drone and the beggar to multiply in the city. Yes, said he, why would they not multiply? Nor are they willing to extinguish an evil of this sort as it blazes up in the city by restricting a person's right to do what he likes with his own property. Nor again will they undo such arrangements by another law. What law do you mean? A law that is second best after that, one that compels the citizens to pay attention to excellence. For if it were decreed that a person enters into most voluntary contracts at his own risk, there would be less shameless money making in the city, and fewer evils like those we have been describing would spring up there. Much fewer. But, as the matter stands, for all sorts of reasons such as those we have given, the rulers of the city put their subjects in this predicament. As for themselves and their own kindred, do they not make the young folk delicate, averse to hard work, be it physical or mental, too soft to withstand pleasures or pains, and lazy too? Indeed. And do they not turn themselves into money makers, who neglect everything else besides this, caring no more for excellence than the poor people do? Yes, no more than that. Then, under such an arrangement, whenever the rulers and their subjects come into contact with one another, either on a journey or in some other communal activity such as a festival, or on military campaigns as shipmates or fellow soldiers, and when they see one another facing actual dangers, the poor are no longer held in contempt by the wealthy folk at all. Indeed, very often the poor man, lean and sunburned, stationed in battle beside the wealthy man who has been reared in shade with far more flesh than he needs, sees this rich fellow out of breath and in total confusion. So, do you not think he will then conclude that such people are wealthy due to some failing on the part of the poor? And when the poor get together in private, will they not proclaim to one another that these men are good for nothing, they are ours for the taking? I know quite well, said he, that this is what they will do. It is not like an unhealthy body that needs only the slightest external influence to tip it into disease, and is sometimes in conflict with itself without any external influence. Will not a city that is in the same condition as that unhealthy body become diseased at the slightest prompting and fight against itself? Perhaps one group might bring in allies from an oligarchic state, or others might bring them from a democratic state, and there may sometimes be conflict without any external influence. Yes, emphatically so. The democracy, I imagine, comes about when the poor, having won their victory, execute some of their opponents, exile others, and grant an equal involvement in civic affairs and in positions of authority to those who remain. The positions of authority in the city are, for the most part, assigned by lot. This is indeed how democracy is established, said he, whether it happens through force of arms or the others withdraw out of fear. Well then, in what way do these people live their lives, and what will a form of government of this sort be like? For it is obvious that a man like this will prove to be a democratic man. That is obvious. Well, in the first place, they are not free. And does not the city become full of freedom? Are they not free? And does not the city become full of freedom and unrestricted speech, with license for anyone there to do what he likes? So they say, anyway. And wherever there is license, it is obvious that each person would make individual arrangements for his own life there, an arrangement that pleases him. That is obvious. So, under this form of government, especially, I imagine, an enormous variety of people of all sorts would arise. Inevitably. Perhaps It is the most beautiful of all the forms of government. Just like a many-colored robe embroidered with flowers of all sorts, this city, decked out with characters of all sorts, would prove to be the most beautiful one there is. Indeed, it is quite likely that most people, just like children and women, when they see decorated objects, would decide that this form of government is the most beautiful one. Very much so, said he. And indeed, my friend, it is somehow quite appropriate to search for a form of government in this one. Why is that? Because it contains forms of government of every kind, on account of the license that it allows. Indeed, anyone who intends to arrange a city, as we have been doing just now, should really go to one that is governed democratically and select whatever arrangement pleases him, as if he were entering a general market selling forms of government of all sorts, to make his selection and found his city accordingly. Well, said he, there would surely be no shortage of examples to choose from. There is no compulsion to exercise authority in this city, even if you are qualified to do so, said Dewey. Or indeed, to be subject to authority if you do not feel like it, or to go to war in time of war, or to observe the peace when everyone else does so if you do not want peace. What is more, if some law is preventing you from holding office or being on a jury, you may hold office or serve on a jury anyway, if it suits you to do so. Now, is this not a divinely pleasant and sweet way of carrying on? Oh, for a while? For a while, perhaps. And what about the calmness of those who have ended up in court? Is that not nice? Or have you never seen people who have been sentenced to death or exile under a form of government like this, remaining on in the city nevertheless, and going about in public? Or how a convicted person stalks about the place unheeded by and unseen by anyone, like a ghost? This happens a lot, said he. And note the tolerance of this form of government, and its lack of any attention to detail. It despises anything we were so serious about when we were founding our city, and said that unless someone had an exceptional nature, he would never become a good man. Unless he were to play in the midst of beauty from his earliest childhood, and engage in pursuits of a similar sort thereafter. See how high-mindedly it tramples upon all this? Pays no heed to the sort of pursuits someone engaged in before they got involved in public life, but honors him as long as he declares that he is well disposed towards the people. How utterly noble, said he. So democracy would, it seems, have these qualities and others akin to these. It is a pleasant form of government, anarchic and variegated, but that bestows some equality on equals and unequals alike. Yes, said he, what you say is all very recognizable. Then, said I, think carefully about what the corresponding person will be like. Or should we first consider how he arises, just as we did with the form of government? Yes, said he. Well, would it not happen in the following way? The miserly, oligarchic man might have a son, I imagine, who has been brought up in the habits of his father. Yes, why not? Then the son, too, would forcibly control any pleasures within him that are conducive to spending money rather than making it, the pleasures that are referred to as unnecessary, obviously. Now, so that we do not discuss this in an obscure manner, do you first want to distinguish between the desires that are necessary and those that are not? And that is where we're going to go ahead and wrap this one up. We are right at halfway, and we are running out of time, right? I try to keep these under an hour with the wrap-up and all involved, and if I get 10 more minutes into it, we're only 15, 20 minutes away from the end, so we'll save the other for tomorrow. Hopefully I brought a little bit of enlightenment and not too much confusion to a not too difficult topic, right? This is a very interesting one today, though, however, because we are going through this. This is exactly the same as what we are going through, right? We are descending into democracy. It is quite obvious from how it is laid out here 3,000 years ago. Another important thing that I want to point out right here is that this usury concept for the government and the way that the usury is done is not relying upon a race of people who are still way over there doing their own thing at the current moment. This is recorded separately from them. I mean, it's a relatively close area, but relatively separated. And so they're not talking about those people. So your racism is not a justifiable thing, ever. On that note, we're going to go ahead and wrap this up. Y'all make sure y'all check out the link down below. It is Mr. David Moran's Horan's interpretation of the original text. It is what we are reading here, and y'all should go back and show some love to him. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you are here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You are perfect, whole, and complete just the way that you are. And this has been PittCast. Peace.